Our next speaker is also coming from India. And again, I want to thank you for being here. So it's Dr. Dhiren Borisa, who is a Dalit queer activist, poet, and an urban sexual geographer. And they are currently employed at Jindal Global Law School as an assistant professor. They are also an honorary visiting fellow at the University of Leicester and interested in sexual mappings and makings of cities from an intersectional and decolonial lens, both among queer spaces in India and in diasporic queer worldings. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Dhiren.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute honor, not just to be present here amongst all of you, but also to speak just after Akhil Kang and how wonderfully he just put across the question of queerness and caste through rimming. And that was much exciting. I'm not going to give more any such exciting things here, but I would want to start with, so many years back, I asked my grandmother, how did she feel when Britishers left India? So it was in 1947, she was alive at that time, and I was curious to know, we are continuously told in a classroom, it was a joyful moment. It was a moment where scholarship might also tell, it was a moment of slaughter and rape, where two diverse nations were killing each other, but also a moment where the colonial imperial rule was ending. And to my surprise, my grandmother said that, I did not know whether Britishers were leaving or not, but all I was told was the Darbar's rule will end. The Darbar will not have any more control on our lives. Now, to people who do not know, Darbar is a feudal caste economy through which lives are dictated. And what my grandmother was imagining and what she was told, that after Britishers have left, it doesn't matter whether Britishers have left or not, that probably the Darbar will have lesser control on our lives. It has been 7 decades after that moment in 1947, and we have been celebrating post-colonial scholarship talks about how we have grown over a period of time. What my grandmother reminds us, that for a lot of us, that colonizing effect has not ended. We are continuing to be colonized by the Darbar. It has metamorphosed itself into the way in which power is organized, how academic spaces are organized, how parliaments are formed, and therefore, whether can we imagine, and that's where I want to begin our conversation today, while we are thinking of decolonizing sexuality, desire, aspiration, our bodies, our dreams, can we think about decolonizing project without thinking about de-Brahminizing it? For me, then the investment in decolonizing sexuality is then actually de-Brahminizing sexuality, because that's where we continue to be colonized. And as Akhil Khan rightly pointed out, how our desires are functioned around those kinds of differentiations, even on the count of rimming. What I also want to acknowledge while sitting from Delhi, that it's not just the colonizing of the Brahminical state in response to Kashmir, that we are colonizers. We have colonized Kashmir, and we have defended the colonizing occupancy by saying that, we have liberated gays in Kashmir. And that's where our homo-nationalism, homonormativity excels into Hindu Brahminical order to say that, we have done great deal. Nobody wants to know what gay Kashmiris feel like. Nobody wants to know what Dalit queers feel like. So yeah, it doesn't matter at all. What I also want to raise here is that in this very vein of thought of being read through the Brahminical gaze, we have often been said that we are mediocre. We have been told that we are mediocre, we are not worthy. So only way we can serve as a good repository of knowledge, good focal point of political action, is to be spectacular. So we have to be continuously strive to be spectacular. We have to earn PhDs. Even in our violence, we have to be spectacular. So the death has to be spectacular. If you're committing a suicide, you should leave behind a suicide note, which is spectacular and brilliant. And it is the brilliance that is celebrated to say that, now we need to think about anti-caste politics. So Rohit Vemula becomes at one moment when institutional murder of Rohit Vemula leads a lot of this Savarna that Akhil mentioned, dominant caste scholarship, academicians, liberal, radical, politicians, activists to come up front on the streets of Delhi and say that, we need to talk about caste. But all this is being done in the framework of saying that, Rohit was such a meritorious student. He wanted to be a writer of science. I wanted to subvert that gaze and say that, I refuse to be that brilliant. I refuse to be that brilliant, and I want to embrace my mediocrity, because my mediocrity reminds that power relationship that situates and gives power to the Brahminical gaze to define what my life is going to be. That I refuse in that very moment to say that, I do not want to be spectacular. I do not want to give you a spectacular story of death and misery and downtroddenness and pity that you can build your savior politics around. And because queer activism and similar to any forms of other activism is built on this kind of power relationship, which is deeply Brahminical, I want to free myself from that kind of a burden to say that a lot of us who have come to occupy academic spaces, occupy spaces of power, have come at absolute risks. Many of them in that process have died, and little success that some of us have achieved, which is celebrated in different forums, probably also this one, is at the cost of so many people who are not spectacular, who cannot afford to be that spectacular. So therefore, I want to celebrate my mediocrity, that I want to say that I'm mediocre and I have no qualms about it, but that I want to throw back that mediocrity to say that, this is my everyday, and I do not want to be judged by the Savarna gaze to tell me what I'm worthy of not. Saying that, I also want to bring out this something which is very intrinsic. That why is it that only when trans people are dead, only when Dalit people are dead, that we become rightful political subject? To say that, is it an unreasonable demand? Is it an unreasonable demand to say that we also deserve to live? We want to live and to be loved and to love, and not only to be loved after our death. And to imagine that whether to be this reasonable in a politics can also be seen as a radical form of politics. Can a reasonable be a radical form of politics? And who will decide, and can this mediocrity frame be the moment to imagine that, that it is what we are asking is a reasonable thing, by the same time dethroning and de-Brahmanizing the very way in which we have come to be read in different forms. I had a very interesting, and that's apart from saying that, how queer spaces in India are filled with casteism, what Akhil also mentioned, how certain caste communities flout their caste identities on Grindr and other dating apps, showcasing how masculinity is drawn out of caste pride, how the caste identity becomes racialized. Building on what Akhil was talking about, Brahmin men, I want to talk about this particular profile that was running around during pandemic, and this profile called itself Brahmin Ka Chora, which would translate as son of Brahmin. Now, interesting was that in the description part of the Grindr profile, they said that I am son of Brahmin, but my habits or my shock, quote unquote, are of Jats. Jat is a dominant caste group, which is not Brahmin, but OBC or the other backward classes in certain parts of the country, but read in the realm of desire as hypermasculine, six-pack abs, 6 feet tall, muscular hunk, which people desire. So how the Brahmin man, who in the sanctity, the sacredness of that identity, wants to own up to that identity, wants to also claim the masculinity which the Brahmin identity does not offer him, but the Jat shock offers this particular body in that particular little space, but simultaneously distancing itself from Nawabi shock, which is the way in which sexuality was read for most part in South Asian context. Nawabi shock, where Muslims were said that, the reason why you decayed, why your empire declined, was because you were engaged in decadent activities such as drinks, dancing, and boys. And here, this Brahmin boy, in this very rubric of Islamophobia, also wants to distance from that Muslim identity and the shock, want to embrace the Jatness and create this very moment of collaboration between different caste groups, but they're all dominant caste group entities. And from there to being in UK while I was there, to be asked in my first time when I reached UK and open up a dating app, are you a Brahmin? One knows that, wherever you go, the way in which South Asian sexuality is formed, it is formed through caste logic. It is formed, the desire is formed through caste, it is formed through Brahminism and Brahminic supremacy, and that needs to be challenged, so and so. I'll end with a small story. After a party in Manchester, I ended up going to my hotel room with two other friends, one a third generation British Sikh man, and another, a friend who was visiting from Palestine. Now, three of us, a Palestinian individual, queer person, a Sikh third generation British Asian, and me, who had just gone to England to imagine probably there is an aspiration, freedom, possibility available in that context. We enter into this elevator, which symbolizes upward mobility because it's going to take us to third floor where the hotel room is. We are joined by a fourth person. It's a black youth who, after seeing us, just looks at us for a minute and then says, go back to your country. And I feel that moment when we have said, go back to your country, and I'm taken like, what does it mean coming from a black person's mouth? This saying that you go back to your country. Where do you go back to? What does it mean for the third generation British Asian? Where does he go back to? What context are his own? What does it mean to the Palestinian person who is migrant and living in UAE, but visiting England, hoping in the queer culture and queer liberation can find some freedom here? What does going back home mean to him? And what does it mean to me into going back to the Brahminical order, which is not to say that it's globally pandemic right now. It's more pandemic than Corona for sure. How does one imagine a decolonial politics without interrogating, engaging with this provincial forms of lived realities that often get erased and not spoken about? Because most of the people who end up speaking about queerness, even in the fancy academic departments in the West, even though being brown, try to erase within the brownness everything, the kind of power dynamics and oppression that they are complicit in, but they want to deny, to safeguard and make carriers over the dead bodies of Dalit people, which can be encashed and theorized into theories which can sell in Berkeley and Columbia. I'll end my rant with a poem, which is another rant, to say that often when we enter into spaces of power and articulate and try to say that, we matter and our lives matter, and our lives don't matter only in our deaths and not only in our violence. We are often said, where are your numbers? You're just one or two people here stranded in that space trying to say something. But if we were to think through mediocrity and to embrace mediocrity and disown the kind of colonizing impulse of that brilliance that is pushed onto us all the time to prove that how brilliant and best we are, we might all be able to show that numbers. Here is a poem on when you're asked to show your numbers, when you're trying to do your politics. Yet again, today you pulled me down through numbers. Yet again today, you pulled me down through numbers. You choked my throat and silenced me like every other time with names that did not resonate. I could not relate to, but which told me, rather reminded me that I do not belong here. In the spaces which I otherwise inhabit daily, or the bodies which I otherwise inhabit, till the time I can also produce with me an army of numbers like the ones that walk the streets as if they own them, forgetful of what and why gives them this visibility, this power to tell me that I will never have it, or do I even need them? So that's it, isn't it? So that's it, isn't it? Till then, I should be silent. Let the norms have the last laugh. Why don't I just fuck off? Yet again today, like every other day, you pulled me down, you pushed me away, you walked over me, my bodies, our bodies, visible bodies, invisibilized bodies, dead, alive. How does it matter? Matters is your walk. Matters is a walk that overlooks my kind like a voyeur does. Such is the privilege of distance, my friend. You won't understand. Just tail and nibs of your rainbow feathers. What about us, you call your intimate? but others. Thank you so much.
I was saying thank you so much, Dhiren, for such a meaningful and beautiful talk, and thank you so much for the poem at the end.